Conclave day 1, first full day. Yesterday, the Cardinals participated in the Holy Mass. We'll go over the homily they received and the actions they took. I'll be talking about some rumors and things and why I hate the rumors going on, because I've been inundated with both videos in my feed, as you probably have, of either on Facebook or on X or here on YouTube, or other things, other places like in my inbox. This person says my sources in Rome say from this cardinal who's a front runner, yada, yada, yada. Well, here's the thing about those leaks. The cardinals all swear an oath to not leak information on pain of excommunication. It means that those rumors are probably not real, because at least any of the reasonably Catholic cardinals are going to actually take that seriously. So please, any rumor you hear coming from Rome in this conclave process incurs excommunication. So please take everything you hear with a grain of salt right now. Remember, the fog of the propaganda war is still going on in this conclave process. Now, the main thing we're going to talk about, well, first I want to just let you know, I am absolutely got open a window here from the Vatican News web camera, from their YouTube channel of the chimney. It's right there. No, there are no seagulls today, so at least not within the camera shot at that angle. But we will definitely be talking about today the St Malachy prophecy. And the reason I'm going to talk to you about the St Malachy prophecy is I have covered, for those of you who are relatively new to the channel, I cover a lot of Catholic prophecy here. I don't go into it the way some other channels do. I just give you what the person said. But the one I've always shied away from was the St Malachy prophecy, because I read the St Malachy prophecy and I read it in light of other Catholic prophecies about the end times. And I could not make that thing make sense with what all the other mystics and the messages of Our Lady and all the other things had to say. And then last year, I came across a new reading of it from a Catholic priest who actually did some research on the scholarly critiques of it and found that he had provided a new reading of it that removed some purported anti-popes from St. Malachy's list. Or more accurately, these are not anti-popes in St. Malachy's list. These are anti-popes that people who read St. Malachy's list insert into the timeline. And you get the problem there. And there's another problem. I will give because we're going to start this here in just a moment. Father Heimerl, very much a critic of Pope Francis. He has said things about Pope Francis that make it clear that Father Heimerl, you could read into Father Heimerl's words that he believes Francis to be an anti-pope. In his final reading of the St. Malachy prophecy, he would say if Pope Francis was a legitimate pope, then there are 3 more popes after him, but that the end times started with Francis. If Francis is declared an anti-pope or if he just was an anti-pope, then you will get 4 popes left. Do you see how this works? Let's go to where it was published by Marco Tossati. Let's first do another check-in with the chimney. It's the most important thing happening today. No smoke as of yet. The Cardinals started voting at 3:30 a.m. Central Time, so about half an hour ago. So we will be paying due diligence and due good attention. Philip says the old book's Catholic Encyclopedia states the prophecy was not published until 1595 and generally regarded as a forgery. The historian say that Father Heimerl cites says that's actually he disputes that and says there's enough scholarly research out there to dispute that, as you'll see in his reading. In fact, when we go over this, he starts out there. That's where he starts. I don't usually, again, I say that as someone who generally does not care much for the St. Malachy prophecy as a general rule, because at least its traditional mainstream reading of it does not work in the broader strokes of Catholic prophecy. But if you take his reading of it, suddenly you can make 3 to 4 more popes work with the general timeline. So here it is. Published almost a little over a year ago on Marco Tossati's website. Headline, Francis and the Darkness of the Church, the Prophecy of Malachy Corrected. This is a little longer than his typical letters. His typical letters are very short. I do publish them most of the time when he writes one. Rumors about the Pope's health are growing, and the next conclave is clearly in the air. The medieval papal prophecy of St Malachy comes to mind for many. What is it, and what do we know about St Malachy? Historically, it is certain that he was abbot of the Irish monastery of Bangor and then Archbishop of Armagh. He died in 1148. His prophecy includes 112 sayings about future popes, who are not mentioned by name. The last pontificate is followed by the last judgment. What today seems adventurous has been considered a fake since the 16th century. The possible paternity of St. Philip Neri has been brought into play. However, this theory has subsequently been refuted. As we know, the painter Duccio de Buonisegna depicted Malachy on the maester of the Siena Cathedral between 1308 and 1311, with the list of his mottos in hand. It can therefore be excluded that Philip Neri, who lived 200 years later, is a pseudo-Malachy. The prophecy must actually date back to the Middle Ages. The German historian Hermann Heri also broke the falsification theory some time ago. In addition, he corrected the previous assignment of pontificates to the said ones by eliminating some anti-popes. This created a new situation. If Francis was previously the last pope, now 3 more will follow. However, this also means that the end times would have begun with Francis at the latest. Let's pause there for just a moment. Again, there are people who make a very good case that Francis is an anti-pope. There's about 100 different ways you can come to that conclusion. Ultimately, the magisterium will decide, but regardless of what the magisterium rules on the future, if they rule anything at all, he either is or is not an anti-pope. This is where you get into murky territory. 3 more popes if he was legitimate, 4 if he's not. Continuing. According to the interpretive tradition, under the next pope, meaning this is the mainstream reading, there would be a cosmic catastrophe. While the penultimate pope could come from Judaism, symbolized by the metaphor of the olive tree in the letter to the Romans. He is followed by Petrus Romanus, under whom there will be a persecution of the church and the destruction of Rome. What is particularly interesting is that the darker meaning of the prophecy now appears in the new count over Francis's pontificate, De Medietate Lunae. This suggests the influence of the crescent moon, a religion whose name you cannot mention on YouTube if you have anything negative to say about it at all, or the refugee crisis. But this is certainly insufficient. A divided pontificate with an incumbent pope and a pope emeritus is also out of the question as an interpretation. The moon is not a figurehead for the papal office, and as we know, there is always only one pope. In Latin, de meditate lunae means not only from the middle, but also from the center of the moon. Seen in this light, it could be a pontificate exclusively under the sign of the moon. But what does the moon mean in a medieval prophecy? This question also cannot be answered unequivocally because the symbolism of the moon remains ambivalent. It can represent the Virgin Mary and the Eucharist. It can also have a demonic symbolic content. It therefore seems important to me to see the motto in the context of the entire prophecy. There, the moon is followed by the sun, de labore solis, and the night by the day. In other words, de meditate lunae describes a dark and threatening pontificate. However, a clarification is necessary. Malachy's mottos do not refer to the categorization good pope, bad pope, but to a label for the state of the church and the world during the respective pontificate. An example is Pius XII. And here's where we have to get into careful territory. He talks about that word that begins with the letter H, that means fiery offering, the thing that happened in the 1930s and 1940s. You can't mention that on this platform, trust me on this one. Or the device that was used on those 2 cities in Japan during that war. Okay, we got to be careful. Our hosts don't respect free speech at all. An example is Pius XII, to whom the new categorization implies the motto Ignis Ardens, burning fire. Again, this is according to his new interpretation. It can be assumed with good plausibility that this refers to the fiery offering of our so-called elder brothers and to one of the cities in Japan. However, to understand Pope Pius XII as the Pope of that offering or the Pope of the device would be absurd. However, those events dramatically overshadowed his pontificate. Ignis Ardens is therefore a very clear statement about the historical context, but not about Pius XII personally. Well, what could the lunar saying say about the pontificate of Francis? It is striking that with its dark meaning, the prophecy anticipates an equally prophetic saying of Paul VI, who in 1972 spoke of the smoke of Satan entering the church. The content of the De Meditate Lunae presumably goes in the same direction and indicates a particular demonic influence. We are undoubtedly experiencing one of the most difficult pontificates of recent centuries, in which everything seems to have fallen into diabolical disorder. This includes the beginning of the schism in Germany. But a Roman schism can no longer be ruled out either if, for example, the Pope were to introduce the ordination of deaconesses. Ultimately, according to many, we are faced with a pontificate of confusion, a pontificate of heresy. After all, Francis was the first pope to bless practice James Martin inclinations, and yes, he did do that, and to tolerate idols in the Vatican. He also did do that. The demonic darkness in the church has never been so great. It remains to be seen whether, after this lunar period, a new era will begin with the next pontificate, De Labore Solis. However, it is doubtful whether this saying really refers to a cosmic event, such as an asteroid. In the context of the prophecy, another interpretation is more likely, namely that the situation of the church will clear up, at least until the last pope, Petrus Romanus, sits on the chair of Peter. By then, at the latest, the darkness of the church, such as we are suffering under Francis, will have been overcome. And something to consider, what if he's an anti-pope? That would then suggest that the next pope will reign over a period of darkness in the church. You're going to get this reading of it tested today or tomorrow, Saturday probably at the latest, because it turns out that a lot of the most conclaves in the modern period last 2 to 3 days, and we are right now on the first day, the first full day. Yesterday was kind of what a lot of us consider the symbolic day where everybody votes for their guy. That's all that they do. And there is a chart here that I'm searching for right now. I should have had it ready. My apologies. But I'll go over with how long some of these there it is. How long some of these conclaves were in the past. Well, let's first check on we'll go here to the chimney, and from the Vatican's feed, nothing. They are voting right now. By the way, there's word on how this happened, on why yesterday took so long. Again, when it comes to rumors and reports from inside, take it with a grain of salt. But here is Catholic Set on how long these things typically take. The length of recent conclaves. Conclave of 1878, 3 ballots, 3 days, Leo the 13th. Of 1903, 7 ballots, the Habsburg Emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire vetoed it because he had that right at the time. It lasted 5 days, resulted in St. Pius X. 1914, 10 ballots, 4 days, Benedict XV. 1922, 14 ballots, 5 days, Pius XI. 1939, 3 ballots, 2 days, Pius X, 12th. 1958, 11 ballots, 4 days, St. John the 23rd. 1963, 6 ballots, 3 days, Paul VI. 78, 4 ballots, 2 days, Blessed John Paul I. 78, 8 ballots, 3 days, John Paul II. 2005, 4 ballots, 2 days for Benedict XVI, and 2013, 5 ballots, 2 days for Francis. Here's what you're going to see happen today. You're going to have any moment now, you're going to have smoke emerge from that chimney. If it's black smoke, 2 hours later, you'll see smoke again, give or take, because they will reconvene to discuss things and then vote again. If it's black smoke again, they will break. And so will I at that point. And then they will come back later in the afternoon, US time, to do 1 or 2 more ballots. If it's black smoke at the end of both of those, they'll come back tomorrow and rinse and repeat until they have a pope. That's how it's going to happen. And the longest conclave in recent time was 8 days, recent being all the way back to 1878. A lot of people suspect this will be done by Saturday. Damien Keller, no, I hate this idea, Damien. If Francis is invalid, then there are cardinals who are invalid, and thus his conclave is invalid and will produce an invalid pope. Enter the 22nd anniversary Holy Pope Peter Romanus. Incorrect. You know why? Because code of canon law is not something that can be used to destroy the church. That's why. We have to get away from the materialist thinking about this stuff. I really wish Vigano had not put that out there. He seems to be the source for this idea. There have been times during this Great Western Schism where, when they finally settled the Great Western Schism, the cardinals were declared to have been valid, even those made by the anti-popes. That will be your precedent. Is it a perfect fit precedent? No. But otherwise, you may as well just go become a sedevacantist, if that is going to be people's attitude about it, because that is where that road leads. And if you're a sedevacantist, that's fine. I don't think you're not Catholic, but it's a road I can't go down. They'll probably vote on Saturday if needed, but not on a Sunday. I suspect they'll be voting on Sunday as well. Haunted News says, the funny thing about the reading of St Malachy that involves counting all known anti-popes is that if new pope is picked soon, it invalidates itself because Francis would be counted regardless. Well, sort of. Again, if it involves counting all of the anti-popes as popes, then yeah. But that's why I won't go along with the traditional reading of it. Besides the fact that there's enough Catholic prophecies out there that basically point to the following supernatural and preternatural events taking place. We are in the spiritual chastisement, Vatican II, whether the council itself or its implementation, whatever it is, the spiritual chastisement. We're in that portion of it. It leads to a material chastisement. God wipes the slate clean, essentially, not to the same degree as the flood. There are actually fair number of survivors who live through a period of turmoil and things, but it's the Marian age of peace. It's peace on a spiritual level. The harvest is great in terms of salvation of souls. In that time, you get a leader in Europe who puts things back together. They call him the Great Catholic Monarch. There's lots and lots of mystics who saw that thing coming. And with that comes an angelic pontiff. And after a generation or so, a new figure arrives. The man of sin arrives right around the time that people probably restore most of the pre-cataclysmic luxuries of life that have led themselves to a life of decadence. And I can't make all the countless mystics, the countless Marian messages that kind of go with it, that paint you a picture of what's to come. I cannot make that work with the St. Malachy prophecy as traditionally read. But I can if there are 3 more popes after this one, after Francis. 4, especially, if Francis was an anti-pope. And I don't use prophecy to substitute for the faith. There is still the possibility that St. Malachy prophecy was complete fabrication. But if it was, it would have had to have been fabricated before 1308, because he does appear in classical artwork depicted with his mottos, those 112 mottos in hand. Are we in the end times? I can't lie, I'm not ready. Every single person who has ever lived has been in the end times in a purely subjective way. Statistically speaking, you have much more likelihood that you are going to stand before our Lord through the natural course of events in your life. And you should be prepared for that. Now, I'm not saying that in an accusatory way, because I'm accusing you of that, then I have to accuse myself too. Okay. So, because I know I am not prepared to meet our Lord if I were to meet him today. You and me both. Again, checking in on the chimney, nothing. Can I leave it open as a small window? If I do that, I can't go over articles and things. No streaming service will let you do both, I don't think. Space Monkey says, I hear the emperor used a veto because the elected pope was a Rosicrucian. Any truth in that? I've heard various different reasons. I would love to have a talk with Edward Habsburg about that and just ask him, what's the truth? I heard about 15 different reasons why your grandpa, great-great-grandpa, whatever it was, vetoed the election of that pope, and we got St. Pius X out of it. Thank you very much for that. But the end result was one of the first papal acts Pius X took was to eliminate the emperor's veto. So, but I'd like to know what the truth was. But it was that he had concerns that the man was highly corrupt. And it was used appropriately. We got a canonized saint out of it. And thank you for the super chat, by the way. What if the material chastisement begins because we get a holy pope? The material chastisement looks suspiciously like a worldwide conflict, a war. That's what it looks like. Because we get a holy pope, I don't know. There's also a distinct possibility we get it because we get a bad pope who just helps fan the flames of the thing. Let's see. Smoke only rising if Pope elect, otherwise twice a day after each of the. Well, there's black smoke if they don't. They will burn the ballots, but it's white smoke if we get a Pope elected. And that'll happen anytime soon. Vantic says you need to watch and be prepared in case the world does end tomorrow or today always. Says in the Gospels to be watched. Yes, in your personal world, be not to get like ultimately relativistic about this, but for every person, their subjective world does end at some point. He will stand before our Lord someday and give an account, and that is much more likely to happen statistically for each individual person than the general judgment. Yes, the general judgment will happen. Every single person alive, when that happens, will face it, but we don't know if that's our generation. Does America and the restoration of the church, you think, or does it perish? Because the mystics make it clear Europe's restoration is the emphasis, not the New World. There are different ways you could read about what happens to the United States in that period. One of which is that the maniac politicians running things get the war they always wanted, and there's not a whole lot of people left in North America afterwards. The other way you could read it is that America stays out of it and is still crippled because of it, because such a conflagration would break down everything. It depends on which one of those mystics and things you read. If you read Alois Ohrmeyer, it's not exactly pleasant to be in America. And I say that as someone living in the United States. We don't believe in some weird herald camping end of the world. I don't know what you're talking about, Fire. I think way too many people think we're in the end times, think it'll be far less expected. I think you're right about that, because a lot of people take prophecy and replace their faith with it. They make it their frame of reference for faith. They will refuse to take any other reading of that prophecy, to the point where they will assume that it's Jesus coming back any day now. Everything else going on in the church will be a reflection of that prophecy. I think this program's warning about risking becoming a neo-Protestant. Sola prophecy is prudent. Yeah, don't take and replace your faith with prophet. Build a false Catholicism based on extremely subjective interpretations of Catholic prophecy. It's extraordinarily dangerous. Yeah, Italian and Australian football fan says this about rumors from Rome. We're going to start getting to news items here. Bro, my father-in-law was a cleaner in Rome. There has been rumors there's a fallen angel hidden in that was only in the 17th century at the Vatican Library. Right. You hear all sorts of bizarre ideas coming out of Rome. Got a super chat here. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it here. Why was Francis's fisherman destroyed by women right before the start of the conclave? Isn't it supposed to be destroyed immediately after Pope's death by the Camerlengo? Yes, it is. And a lot of people are asking the question, why did you wait so long to destroy this? And why wasn't it the Camerlengo? And could there be a whole lot of questionable documents that came from that? I'll give you an example. A questionable document would be something like, I don't know, Cardinal Beccio. He showed up. If you don't remember who he is, he's the cardinal who was tasked with investigating the Vatican finances and the money pit that the Vatican Bank is. He was then implicated in all sorts of financial misdeeds himself. And he got convicted of it and may go to prison. He himself has said he is the fall guy for it, and initially it looked like he was just involved. He took on the job that Cardinal Pell had been doing before him. Pell found a lot of things weird going on in Rome with their finances, and then he went to go take care of some business of some kind in Australia, and somebody in Rome wired a whole bunch of money to Australia, and when he got there, they charged him with McCarrick kind of offenses that when you read the details of, are impossible if you know anything about what it's like to serve a mass for an archbishop. And I know that because I have served a mass for an archbishop at a cathedral. I have done that. And I know what everything behind the altar, everything out of normal sight for people looks like. It would have been physically impossible for Pell to have done what they said he did, especially since we're talking about the highest profile cardinal archbishop in your country, okay, at a public event. Before Pell, it was Archbishop Vigano, who had been investigating these same things and then was moved by Benedict XVI to the United States for his own safety. Becci was a fall guy. what this has to do with the fisherman's ring is this. Cardinal Pell arrives at the conclave with a letter in hand. Bet you had arrived at the conclave saying that he had the right to participate in the conclave like every other cardinal. Pell arrives with a letter, no date on it, claiming to have been signed by Francis with a stamp on it and everything, saying that he had been stripped of his rights. Real fishy. A lot of fishy things going on with this conclave. So, let's take a look here more in the chat. I read that rumor on a set of Countess websites. Take it with a grain of salt. There is it possible that the St Malachy prophecies are incomplete? Maybe. It could be that they are like the Lost Salette. Our Lady of Lost Salette her messages were essentially hidden until the 1990s, like forgotten about. The full messages were. And it's in there that you get phrases, things like the 2 worm-ridden popes and other kinds of things in there that you would understand why Leo the 13th would have had suppressed, because it's just unfathomable that things that were talked about in there could apply to the Catholic Church. End times, I'm Catholic, not Protestant. Well, that's the end times as a phrase that makes eschatological sense. Just don't take their interpretation of end times. Because you know why Protestants don't like Catholic prophecies, but they do love the St. Malachy prophecy. They do. They will invoke the St. Malachy prophecy because they think it means God's going to destroy the Antichrist Catholic Church and going to restore, I don't know, Pastor Bob's sing-along praise and worship concert next to B-dubs over at the strip mall as the way to do Christianity. It's wild stuff. Typically, these are American Protestants who do this. I would love if there's a European Protestant who is a part of what we would call a mainline traditional European branch of Protestantism in the chat. I'd really love to know, and I won't give you any judgments on this. Do European Protestants find American Protestantism as wild and weird as some of us Catholics do? I'm curious if that's the case. Space Monkey says with the super chat, the end of the world comes when the good Lord wills it. Until then, I follow the Lord in his church and walk in the footsteps of Christ. That is all you can be expected to do. Make sure you're always in a state of grace. And when you're not, get to confession as soon as you can. Don't be afraid to call the monastery near you to find out if their priests are hearing confessions. They usually will accommodate you. There's not a lot of reason except your own stubbornness and own hardness of heart from not going to confession when you need to. All right. So a lot of people, we have the recipes. I had BWW last night. It was gross. And it's one of the better of the wing places too, sadly, just because of the way they cook their chicken. But I will show you here let's go. David Willis talks about St. Malachy is more like Nostradamus. It is. And that's one of the reasons I don't like it either. It's a little more vague than most others are. Well, let's go with some news updates. First, on the subject of rumors. This was posted all over Facebook and social media. This is a screenshot of Austin Ivere, professional Francis fan fiction writer. He writes Francis's biographies, and they read like fan fiction. But Michael Hitchborn, Lepanto Institute, you may have seen him on podcasts, posted this, and I'll read his comment here. But Austin Ivere said, I'm hearing that Cardinal Raniero Cantalamessa, who was slated to give the Cardinals their pep talk after the Extra Omnes, went on for 50 minutes rather than his allotted 15. That's why it took so long to count the votes. He went on far too long. And a priest asked the obvious question, genuine question, how do you know if the Cardinals have just promised secrecy on pain of excommunication, who is leaking information? Michael Hitchborn asks, serious question, if Cardinals are excommunicated for leaking information from inside the conclave, doesn't that excommunication extend to those who share that information? And the answer to that question is a logical yes. It should extend to them. This is why I get really frustrated when I see otherwise good traditional commentators talking about, my source in Rome, who's close to this cardinal, said this. If your cardinal told something to the priest about what happened inside that conclave, he broke his vow. Doesn't matter how good they are. I heard this from someone who claimed to have someone close to one of the highest profile cardinals from Europe. Someone who might walk out of the loggia as the Pope. So take this stuff with a grain of salt. The rumors aren't going to help anybody. When we go here, Catholic Conclave on X. It says, Cardinal Casper, they, meaning the laity, all want to do Francis. The opposing factions, they are few. We will not backtrack. Now, Cardinal Casper is too old to participate in the conclave. He was there for the pre-discussions, and then he left. He's free to talk about whatever he wants to with everything he's heard. His constant drumbeat has been, the laity all want to do Francis. Now, we'll give you one piece of evidence about it. It's anecdotal. The most popular cardinal on social media right now in terms of content related to him, Cardinal Luis Tagle. If you go to TikTok, you will see that video clips of him talking and singing his silly songs get millions of views on TikTok. The TikTok views don't mean much. Nobody watching those videos is going to participate in the conclave. But that's where people are. A lot of people want another Francis. Speaking of social media, complicit clergy posted this. Let's see if I can go find the actual photo here. But the headline they have is, tone-deaf USCCB gets blasted on social media. After posting a video of the U.S. Cardinals are attending the conclave in Rome, the USCCB was roundly criticized. Here it is from the official U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops X account. Conclave ready, several North American cardinals who have been staying at the Pontifical North American College during this interregnum period departed this afternoon with cheers and prayers of the seminarians and staff of the college sending them off. You want to talk about tone? There it is. Gregory, you saw Tobin, Cardinal Supich. They're all being applauded. I want to remind you that we are in a minority here. There's Cardinal Dolan, people trying to float him as a moderate candidate. Cardinal McElroy. I always forget his name. Oh, there's O'Malley. That's who the College of Cardinals' U.S. representative is. That's also a who's who lineup of Ted McCarrick's friends or allies. Got to remember, Dolan himself has accusations laid at his feet that he hid people away. Space Monkey says the end. Oh yeah, no, we already covered that. All right, good. I'm just trying to keep up with these things right now. There, PL says maybe a lot of people want another Francis, but how many of these people are actually Catholic? Probably few. Maybe most Catholics. I followed the polling data on Francis a lot from organizations that do a pretty good job of getting the, something close to the ballpark of reality when it comes to opinion ratings. Francis is more popular in the United States than any president we've had, except maybe Obama at his peak or maybe Bush at his peak in late 2001. He was. We live in a bubble. We always need to remember we live in a bubble. David Wilson says Scotland has a lot of nutty Protestants, but American Protestants do nuttiness bigger and better. Like everything else we do in America is bigger. We do it bigger and better than anybody else, to our detriment. Did they exclude Burke from the USCCB stuff? Yeah, it looks like it. Or he had the good sense not to show up. But then again, he's always been on the outs with those guys. You have to remember, Cardinal Burke personally approved the apparition of Our Lady of America. And it was the USCCB led by Supich and company, by men in that picture or in that video, who said, no, Our Lady of America is not real. Okay. Burke has always been on the outside with them for a long time. And he's also not an ordinary. I believe everyone you saw there is or was an ordinary of a diocese. Burke hasn't been an ordinary for a diocese for a long time. The poor Cardinal Dolan, could you see him walking out on the loggia munching on a moon pie lecturing us about fasting? There's a reason some people are starting to call him Cardinal Donut. I know that doesn't sound very respectful, but there are people doing that because he equated the crescent moon followers of the false prophet and their so-called fasting season, which I've explained in the past why it's fake. If you ever talked to one of them before or in the West, they will laugh about it. Talk about how their societies become nocturnal. People sleep at day. They go to work at night when they don't normally have a night shift. So, and then they basically skip breakfast. And then people joke about putting on weight during that season. Okay. I'm not trying to be mean-spirited about this. I've heard this from the lips of multiple followers of the false prophet. Dolan went up and said that that fasting season and Lent were basically the same thing. And he did it while munching on a donut, which was fantastic. Optically, it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Jude says Tagle scares the hell out of me. A lot of people. He does. Philip says Vigano was nuncio when many of these guys were installed. Yeah, and Vigano would admitted himself fully that he didn't question much of what was going on at the time. Probably just trying to keep his head down, not make waves. Memento says, like you said yesterday, Dr. Stein and Joe McLean's show, if a Holy Orthodox Pope steps out on Logia, then he should get the bad Cardinals around for a meeting, then arrest them all. Yeah, I said it in a more spicy way than that on Joe's channel, but basically, he should, if you get a the fictional Pius the 13th type of Pope, there's a lot that he should do. And he would get a reputation for being a terrible Pope for it. There seems to be an overall confusion about the SSPX and their standing. Can I clarify? Yeah, sure. They're not in schism. They have an irregular canonical status. They're in communion with Rome. There is no such thing as partial communion. They're in communion. They offer the name of the Holy Father, when we have one, in the canon of the Mass. There are pictures of the Holy Father in the naves of their parishes. I've been to an SSPX parish. You wouldn't know it is any different in any way other than a few of the books on the shelf and occasionally something said in the homily. That's it. Bishop Schneider, on behalf of Pope Francis, an official operation for the Vatican, spent 2 years observing the SSPX. He went to their seminaries, went to their masses, spoke with lay people, everybody associated with the SSPX, and he did it for 2 years. And he wrote an official report for Francis that he signed off on. He said they are not in schism. Everything they teach in their seminaries is Catholic. What you have is a theological dispute, and it should be handled behind the scenes. It should be handled by the bishops of the SSPX and the bishops in Rome, mostly by them. There are a lot of bishops and priests in the church who adopt their own magisteriums on this stuff. And a lot of lay people who mouth off and tell you how it's evil to go to their masses with them, whatever. If you want to hear pro SSPX arguments, Kennedy Hall kind of wrote the lay book on it, the most recent version. His channel, he does a lot of SSPX related things, and he's very measured in how he talks about this stuff. I would direct you to him. But in general, they're not in schism. No matter what some talking head tells you, Francis signed off on the document saying that they're not in schism. Schneider, who is no Bergoglian, visited them and found that everything they teach there is Catholic, that they love the faith. And the SSPX themselves say that we are obedient to Rome, but you can't be obedient to your father when he's intoxicated. They likened it to, imagine coming home and finding your father has had a few too many beers. And he starts giving you all kinds of orders that are wild and completely out of keeping with him. Would you go do them? Would you go sell your father's house because he told you to while he was, deep into a bottle of Jack? You probably would not. They say that the popes since Vatican II have all imbibed of the heresy of modernism to some degree. That doesn't make them anti-popes, they say. They're not sedevacantist. All right. The white cloud behind the chimney almost. Yeah. Smoke should be coming out at the top of the hour about 20 minutes from now. That's what they say, but we're going to now do another check-in on the chimney just to be safe. Nope. Every time I check it, it's a little bit brighter. But as a general rule, a lot of people, to give you just their opinions on the SSPX, I'm just basing it on mine on everything I've read from the officials in Rome and what the SSPX have said. And their attitude about things is a lot different than some other groups that don't have a normal canonical status. Now, as for yesterday, here's Vatican News reporting on what Cardinal Re's prayers were that he gave at the homily or at the Mass for the invocation of the Holy Spirit. Again, Vatican News, official news arm of the Vatican. Cardinal Re, united in prayer before the conclave, we ask the Holy Spirit for guidance. On Wednesday morning, the 7th of May, in St. Peter's Basilica, the Mass for the election of the Roman Pontiff took place with the cardinals and over 5,000 faithful in attendance. Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, Dean of the College of Cardinals, presided over the celebration, saying that in a special way we feel united with the entire people of God in their sense of faith, love for the Pope, and confident expectation. Recalling the reading in the Acts of the Apostles, how after Christ's ascension into heaven, all were united in persevering in prayer together with Mary, the mother of Jesus, the cardinal said in his homily that all gathered here are praying together, as well just a few hours before the start of the conclave, under the eyes of Our Lady beside the altar, in this basilica which rises above the tomb of the Apostle Peter. He explained that at the celebration, we invoke the help of the Holy Spirit, asking for his, quote, light and strength so that the Pope may be elected, may be he whom the Church and humanity need at this difficult, complex, and troubled turning point in history. Let's pause there. My own personal prayer for this has always been it's a Pope that does the will of God, that aligns with the will of God and not the personal, particular wills of scheming politician cardinals. It's a bit different than what Cardinal Cantalmessa says here, or Cardinal Re, rather. To pray by invoking the Holy Spirit is the only right and proper attitude to take as the cardinal electors prepare to undertake an act of the highest human and ecclesial responsibility to make a choice of exceptional importance. This is a human act for which every personal consideration must be set aside, keeping in mind and heart only the God of Jesus Christ and the good of the Church and of humanity. As proclaimed in the Gospel reading during the celebration, Cardinal Re recalled how Jesus calls on everyone to love one another as he has loved them, even to the point of laying down one's life, a message of boundless love that the Lord calls a new commandment. To love that Jesus reveals knows no limits and must characterize the thoughts and actions of all his disciples, who must always show authentic love in their behavior and commit themselves to building a new civilization, what Paul VI called the civilization of love. Love is the only force capable of changing the world. Continuing his homily, Cardinal Re recalled how the readings proclaimed during the celebration call us to fraternal love, mutual help, ecclesial communion, and universal human fraternity. And there's some ideology there. Universal human fraternity is not something that ever appeared in Catholic lexicons until Francis. And a key task of every successor of Peter is fostering communion in all forms, communion of all Christians with Christ, communion of the bishops with the Pope, communion of the bishops among themselves, entirely directed towards communion among persons, peoples, and cultures. Again, this is Francis stuff. The reading also reminds us about the duty to maintain the unity of the Church on the path traced out by Christ to the apostles. This unity of the Church is willed by Christ, he explained. A unity that is strong and marked by profound communion in diversity, provided that full fidelity to the gospel is maintained. Each pope continues to embody Peter in his mission and thus represents Christ on earth. He is the rock on which the Church is built. The election of a new pope is not simply succession of persons. The election of a new pope is always the Apostle Peter who returns. You can forgive me after having read that for not being super enthusiastic about the events today. Fraternity? Group hug? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I'm personally tired of the universal human fraternity talk, and I fear we're not going to be done with it. I'm confused. There was no investigation of the heresies, and 80% were appointed by Francis. That doesn't mean they were invalid cardinals. The Great Western Schism, cardinals appointed by anti-popes were declared to be valid cardinals by the pope who won the conclave, because if they hadn't been declared, he would have been an invalid pope. Thus, the end of the Church. Okay. Code of canon law is not meant to create a loophole for which Satan can just smash the Church to pieces and destroy God's promise. It's one of those things. If Smoke Ring comes out there just showing off, yeah, that would be funny. I heard the word Sedeprivationism by some traditional Catholics. What is this word? Its meaning? Can you offer examples? Sure. Essentially, Sedeprivationism is the argument that, sure, there are popes. They are on paper popes. They continue the line, but they lose their authority because they teach heresy. It's the least defined, but probably most widely held position. Sedevacantists are very, very few actually out there. They're very loud. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They're very vocal. Maybe that's a better word. They're very vocal about their position. They are very extremely media savvy. And so their position is the one that appears to be very large. But Sedeprivationism is essentially a very ill sort of defined and ill explored idea that is held to by a lot of people, which is that their authority has been surrendered. The popes have since 1958 or so, because they completely fundamentally changed the orientation of the Church in their new ecclesiology, as they call it, their new theology of what the Church is and its relationship to the world and its mission in the world. It needs to be explored more by theologians who on both sides of the issue. Damien Keller says the church will be eclipsed. That's where we are, I think. That's, I think, where we are. Space Monkey says, I missed a super chat. All right, let me take a look. I missed a couple. Good. Cardinal Pell is condemned by the court of public opinion here in Australia. The media here hates the church regardless of the facts. Get used to it. What did our Lord say about being loved by the world and being hated by the world? Australia was a perfect place for them to take out Cardinal Pell the way they tried. Perfect place. The church in Australia, like the church in much of the West, did an especially terrible job of handling their McCarrick problem, their wicked, evil priests who should not be in the priesthood problem. I don't know what Pell's personal role was in trying to sweep stuff away. I don't know. But somebody clearly tried to silence him because of what was found in the Vatican bank system. If you go back to the post-conciliar era, all the way through, reading all the headlines about the church, all the scandals in the church, the Vatican bank is almost always coming up. If you want a good, sort of easy to read synthesis of this, everybody's heard of Malachi Martin's book, Windswept House. That's not the book I recommend anybody starts with. I recommend people read Vatican. If you can get a copy of it, I thought it was in reprint. It's not. So you'll have to search around for a copy. It can be found on Kindle, but physical copies are kind of hard to come by, at least at a good price. But it details the crisis in the church from about 1944 all the way until 1988. He wrote the book in like 83 or 84. He thought that what happened to John Paul II involving, when someone tried to remove him from this mortal coil, he thought that the wound he took there would eventually call him to our Lord by the end of the 80s. So that's about the only detail he gets wrong, because he wrote it in there before all that happened. And it was a logical thing to guess would happen, but he was just incorrect. But it details all those things. The Vatican, and it's written in the same way Windswept House is. It's an outline of the crisis in the church with actual events, just the names changed out. And most of the names, there's not a key for figuring out who these guys are, but a lot of the names of the ecclesiastics, if you're familiar with that period, will be pretty obvious who they are. And you'll get a good lesson on the role of the Vatican Bank in all of this, as well as something Malachi Martin has said in that book that I have never seen anybody else say. It needs exploration. And that his assertion was, he makes an assertion in the opening pages of the book, just like in the previous one, in Windswept House. He said there's a deal with essentially a satanic ritual was done that kicks off the events of the book. That's what everybody knows Windswept House for. In Vatican, he makes it, he has essentially Pius IX making a deal with the secular authorities when the papal states are finally destroyed and the Vatican city-state is born. That essentially has the Vatican, yeah, it's fine. Catholic Church can oppose all these other things going on in the world. It's your duty. We get that. Just don't do it in a real way. And you can just let the secular world do the secular world's thing, let things unfold as they're going to, and you will have access to the new financial infrastructure being developed for the new order of things at that time. The book's about the Vatican Bank, essentially. Read it if you can find a copy. And then Ande Tag said, my mom is Protestant from Austria, and yes, she definitely finds U.S. Protestants bewildering, to say the least. I'm an American. I love my country, love my countrymen. American Protestantism just blows my mind. It really does. And I don't mean, somebody like a Lutheran who would be found to be like a Lutheran in Europe. I don't mean that kind of Protestant. I mean like rock and roll, Hillsong United Protestantism, let alone, like a lot of the stuff that you see taking off now is just wild. Jude says, the Francis insider seemed cheerful, cocky, emerging from breakfast. Really? Where does that information come from? And I ask, because things that happen at the Conclave are hands off. Any rumor coming from them is probably baseless at this point, because they all took an oath to a pain of excommunication not to tell us what happened. But you said they seem cheerful, excuse me, emerging from breakfast. I'm wondering where that came from. Because that's not a good sign. But then again, if it really is, Bergoglian versus Parolin, and Parolin is just another Bergoglian, then somebody asked in the chat if I thought that there was a chance for Erdo or whatever. I don't know. Catching the end, but watch later. Thank you, Anthony. Bellator, this is a reference to something King of the Hill, the cartoon King of the Hill, cartoon made for an adult audience. They're making fun of Christian rock music. Right? This is a reference to Hillsong United. But don't you see, you're not making rock and roll better, but you're making Christianity worse. That's a pretty accurate take. I don't care what kind of music you listen to, just use discernment. But like a lot of that Christian rock stuff, I have seen it used in masses before, and it's just appalling. It really is. And it's appalling because it has no place in the mass, and also appalling just in terms of taste personally. But even if I liked it, I wouldn't want it at mass. Secularization of worship is one of the great tragedies of the modern age. Traditionalist Catholic says if the super force of windswept house is true, that explains a lot about the crisis. The super force was what Malachi Martin used to describe the same thing that Vigano describes as he likes to use the word deep, and then he follows that with some other words, right? Words you can use, but not together, like church. And or sometimes you've heard this referred to with the word state. You put those together, YouTube hits you with a hammer really hard. I know, it's happened to me. So, but he likes to use those together. Malachi Martin used the word superforce, essentially to describe the hierarchy. Not so much the hierarchy, although they're definitely part of it, but that invisible part of the Roman Curia, invisible to the typical person. These are the typical seminarians and priests and laity who work in the Roman Curia. Most of them Jesuits, but not just Jesuits. The men who, if you example here being like this of, I think it was John Venari, maybe somebody else, maybe Father Gruner, somebody like that. 10 years ago I saw a podcast of them talking about the meeting they'd had with Benedict XVI, saying, we'd written you letters, Holy Father, about this evil priest doing evil things, and nobody did anything. Why didn't you do anything? And he pointed to his door saying, that's where my authority ends. I don't even get most of my mail. They read my mail. That's the super force. Space Monkey. Cardinal Pell's old cathedral, St. Mary's in Sydney, had a record number of catechumens last year. Despite all of it, the truth wins. It does. And if you're looking for a silver lining in the state of the church today, it's the record number of people coming into the church. Hopefully it'll help close that gap, that horrifying number. For every 100 people who come into the church, 800 leave. Meaning every one person who enters the church, 8 leave. And it's a true statistic. So hopefully we can turn those numbers around. Something is happening in the thing. Oh, we're getting a report from the chat that there is black smoke. Let's go here. Yep, there is black smoke. Well, of course, I go right to it, and it cuts the feed cuts away, but it'll be back. Black smoke means second ballot was a failure. We do not have a new pope yet. So I can just rewind it a little bit, because it's so weird that they would. Okay, why would you? There it is. Why would you guys? There it is. Vatican. Black smoke. So ballot number 1 for the first full day, probably by the counting, be technically the second day. Nobody emerges. This should not surprise anybody. That is not pink or multicolored. Colombo Yuki says modern music at mass doesn't match the solemnity of the mass. Modern music just doesn't make sense. Exactly. I've never heard modern style music that is sufficiently solemn compared to Palestrina or chant, whether it's Gregorian chant or the Eastern chants. For those of you who may not understand why we take that approach, think of it this way. If you've never been to a TLM, you might have been to an Eastern Rite Mass, to a Divine Liturgy of the Maronite, or the Divine Liturgy according to St. John Chrysostom, Byzantine, or wherever else. Could you imagine Hillsong United played at that? No, obviously not. Then why is it okay at a Latin Rite liturgy? We should take our liturgy with the gravity that the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church take theirs. And from there, we can have our liturgy discussions with new Mass versus old, all the rest of it. But at least we should be able to take the Mass with the gravity of the fact, with the recognition of the fact that that priest is engaging in a miracle at the altar, and that you are going to be consuming the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our blessed Lord Jesus Christ, who gave his life and bled out on the cross for you. Take it with the gravity of all that. If you wouldn't sit there and play Christian pop rock at the foot of the cross, you're probably not going to be, then it shouldn't be at the Mass. Is it true that Rome rewrote the ordination formula different from the old Roman Rite? How would this affect the sacraments? Well, okay. So there was, after Vatican II, they began to revise the sacraments. That doesn't make them invalid. Everything from the consecration at the altar to absolution, ordination, all of it. That does not make them invalid. They even touched up the exorcism. The new rite of exorcism works. According to exorcists, they will tell you it doesn't work as well as the old one did. That's why so many exorcists prefer the pre-Vatican II form in full Latin of the rite of exorcism. But it does work. The new sacraments are valid. Cardinal Pell, he should be canonized for all he suffered. I will say that they should investigate him just like anybody else who would have a cause, which is with the heavy-handedness of the old system, right up there, complete with the devil's advocate. And I would not want to be the devil's advocate for anybody. The old devil's advocate was their job to dig up all the dirty laundry on somebody and then air it in the process. Typically, after the process, they go to confession. Harmony said, "Black smoke. Perhaps I'll be able to sleep now." Well, they're gonna have another ballot in about 2 hours. LaPonta did a great investigation of Catholic hymnals. Oh yeah, the modern hymnals at your parishes are a hot mess. Yeah, Nelson says there's a couple more opportunities later for today for smoke, so still could be today. Yes, there will be another. Again, there will be another smoke signal, I guess, in 2 hours, give or take. They will then break for several hours, as will I, and then they will come back this afternoon and into the evening in Rome for 2 more ballots. And if there's no white smoke today, then they'll reconvene tomorrow, rinse and repeat until this is done. But I will show you again, just to give you an idea how long this could take. Post what Catholics sat on X, and there it is. The length of recent conclaves. Now, the number of ballots they take per day changed over the last century and a half. But in 1878, it took three ballots in 3 days. 1903, 7 ballots plus a Habsburg veto, which I talked about already, 5 days. 1914, 10 ballots, 4 days. 1922, 14 ballots, 5 days. 1939, 3 ballots, 2 days. 58, 11 ballots, 4 days. 6 ballots, 3 days. And 63 and 78, first time, 4 ballots, 2 days. And 8 ballots, 3 days, the second time. The 2005, 4 ballots, 2 days. So if Benedict XVI could be what you're looking at, or 5 ballots, 2 days for Francis. Meaning at this point, 2013 and 2005, they were getting black smoke. But by that final ballot, they'd gotten white smoke today. Doesn't mean it'll have to be the way it plays out today, but it could be. If you live stream when we see white smoke, any chance fellow triad personalities could appear with you? I'm hopeful, but like it's hard to get people on this early. And every person, every figure out there that I could probably get on, people would be like, "Oh, if you have Kennedy Hall on, I'm done. I'll never watch you again. Oh, if you have Tim Gordon on, I'll never watch you again. If you have the little old lady down the road who blogs about her flowers on, I'll never watch you again." So there's always a hazard. Catholic Arrows, thank you for the super chat. Thank you, Dr. Stine, for highlighting the importance of the promises of Jesus to St. Marie of St. Peter. Holy face, devotion is for our times. Arise, O Lord, and let thy enemies be scattered. Yes, there was a big holy face devotion movement going on recently. There had been, let's say, some bishops or priests have been promoting it recently in their parishes, and you'd love to see it. I've got something on my channel about the holy face devotion. Please watch it or look it up and keep the holy face devotion if you're looking for a new devotion in your life. The church has a countless treasury of these things, all designed to help keep your eyes on the cross. and help keep you on that straight and narrow road. There he goes. Anthony Abbott says, if you ever have Anthony from Avoiding Babylon on, we'll never watch you again. Actually, if you want to hop onto this stream, you're free to do so. I will send you a link. But I'm pretty sure you're on your way to that job you claim to have during the day. Anthony is always on X during the day. So some of us joke that, while he's supposed to be out there repairing roads out in New Jersey or New York, it's odd that he's spending as much time as he is. Hopefully you're not using a steamroller or something while you're on X. Look at the chimney. Am I crazy? Probably, but let's see. That's black smoke. Let's refresh the screen. Now nothing. The black smoke was going to end at some point. So no. No white smoke at the moment. Next smoke is at 10:30 a.m. Central, 11:30 a.m. No, they're going to have a second ballot today. Anthony says, I think I'm going to take the day off tomorrow if there's no Pope elected this afternoon. Maybe we can do something together then. Yeah, if you're usually up this early, if you want to come on. Happy to help you promote your channel too at that. But yeah, we should be having another good, there should be another ballot happening this morning. Typical family nepotism guy never works. White smoke would be expected around 5:30 p.m. Rome time, 11:30 Eastern. Smoke, black or white from the second vote, would be expected around 7 p.m. Rome time, 1 p.m. Eastern. So yeah, that'd be what, 10:30 this morning, or my time, or noon roughly today. So there was a actual posting on this somewhere that I saw. Maybe it was Stine Montagna posted it. It's one of those I should have kept, but I didn't think about it really at the time. Let me just quickly find it. So, because somebody posted yesterday, no, it was definitely not Stine Montagna who posted this, but there was somebody who posted yesterday roughly the schedule, and it reflected what she said there. More smoke like white appearing. Let's just take a risk here and bring up. That's a cloud. That's not smoke. That is what we call a cloud. I know it is cloudy weather. Why can't we get the all those guys who've got their their harp arrays to clear the skies over Rome? You do something good with it for once. But no, it's there's no smoke appearing. We'll stop that so we don't get any kind of copyright on us. Because YouTube does not like live streams within live streams. They really don't like that. Yeah, black smoke at 5:50. Yeah, I showed it. 4:30 a.m., 6 a.m., 11:30. See, there's your general timeline. 4:30 a.m., 6 a.m., so Central. So about an hour from now, and then 11:30 and 1 p.m. And if there's no white smoke at the 6 a.m., we'll wrap this one up, and I will try to be back here 11 or 11:30 to do this, because this is the most important thing happening on the planet and all of creation. This is the most important thing happening. Let's see. Apologies if you covered it, but have you seen that interview with James Martin? Something I thought you would cover. Which interview? Which interview are you talking about? I don't always do a lot of his TV interviews because I can't really control the words that come out of his mouth. But if you let me know what you're talking. Do you think Francis was going to release financial records of Vatican banks prior to dying? Was he rushed in? No. Francis was too cozy with keeping those powers that be hidden away. He probably was trying to reform them, but he wasn't going to expose all the church's dirty laundry. Is a little chimney considered sacramental? I doubt it, but I would imagine that thing has been around for a century. Yeah, even the secularists are covering this. It's because, as many have pointed out, I think classical theist, who was definitely more of a conservative Catholic commentator more than a traditionalist, but he was said that even the world knows the world revolves around Christ and his church, and this is when they acknowledge it. It was just for 8 p.m. Thursday night in Australia. We just got that black smoke about 8 minutes ago now. Yes. Blackfish Blue says Italy's partly overcast today. Not the best weather to watch smoke rising. Unfortunately, that is true. Let's have 40 of them secretly come up with a new pope, and then it'll be schism. And that will be an interesting day if that were to happen. I don't think, because the same people everyone's asking, like there's a Dr. Mazza has got a hypothesis out there about having the good cardinals essentially just elect their own pope and letting history sort it out, basically. The problem with that is you would absolutely get schism, but that's not even the real problem. The real problem is that you're asking the same men to do that who wouldn't even do a follow-up to the dubia that they promised. Yeah, Father Martin is a guest commentator with ABC News. Yeah, I did see the pictures of that floating around yesterday. Same with that same news host who gave President Trump a hard time and tried to ambush him basically at the debates last year. Yeah, that guy. That's the second vote has taken place. That smoke covered both morning ballots. Are you sure about that? I've seen nothing about that. All right, so we're gonna go check Vatican News, the website here. No, they have no update there so far. No update for today whatsoever. So now we'll go to X, which is where news seems to happen in real time. And you know what? Speaking of James Martin, let's just go check in with him. He will, James Martin is an interesting source of information. He really, really is, because he's very measured in how he says things. He's absolutely extremely dangerous because of how intelligent the man is. But if you're looking for information about things going on, he is a very good source. His latest update is 2 hours ago. Brace yourselves, Pastor Jimmy Martin of the Jesuit Church.
Hey everyone, it's Father Jim Martin. I am high above St. Peter's Square, where I'm helping out ABC. As you probably know, there was black smoke last night, and that means no Pope. Now, a lot of people say that black smoke is not surprising on the first ballot, even though it took a long time. One of the reasons is that the first ballot is usually seen as a kind of primary, right, where 4 or 5 candidates will emerge, with maybe 20 or 30 votes. And then, as our Vatican correspondent Jerry O'Connell told me last night, it's good because the people get to go home. The cardinal electors get to go home for 12 hours and kind of reflect on, these 4 or 5 candidates. Then what happens is, we see if one candidate kind of rises, right? Or if one candidate is, as a friend of mine said, blocked, meaning if he can only get 20 or 30 or he's kind of stuck, right? We could see white smoke today, maybe later on. Who knows? Could be tomorrow. If there's really a deadlock, they could go past Friday and then past the weekend. So we'll see. It's hard to predict. Only the Holy Spirit knows. We have to continue to pray for the cardinal electors in their important task of choosing the next successor of St. Peter. So from high above St. Peter's Square with ABC.
Right. And nothing he said there was incorrect. So, but I'm, again, not really seeing much here. A lot of people tweeting here about Cardinal Sarah. I will guarantee you that I guarantee you that the figures are not reading it. Catholic Sat posting the black smoke, which looked a lot like white smoke in the video he was showing. Vatican News tweeting out did tweet out the black smoke on their X account when they didn't post about it on their Facebook or on their actual website. From chimney above Sistine Chapel, meaning 133 cardinal electors have not yet chosen a new pope. No pope after 21 votes. The cardinals pause for prayer and reflection. Voting then resumes, etc., etc., etc. So I've seen nothing saying that they've done both. From everything I've ever read about how this goes, they give you black smoke after each ballot is to cast. Was it always the smoke that announced the new pope? No, I know that the current conclave process goes back 1,000 years, but I don't know if the use of black smoke, white smoke goes back that far. Jay Patterson for Vatican News. If 2 votes are held in succession, which we don't know if that was the case, the ballots from both are burned together at the end of the second round. One smoke after two votes. Well, if that seems to be the case, let me see. Let me go to Vatican. Where is Vatican News on this? Actually, I know how to find that. We'll just go to Grok. Use Grok here. If you're not familiar with Grok, it's an AI tool. I'm not a huge fan of AI, but as information aggregation, it's fine. There. Let's see. When do they get rid of the ballots from the conclave? After each or two successful? It says after every 2 voting rounds. Okay. Typically it occurs twice a day. Okay. You guys are right, and I am wrong. Fair enough. So I guess it looks like they won't be back until this afternoon. So we're going to wrap up here for now. France is part of the liberal, progressive, secular, heretical, and seditious. Why would they have removed him forcibly? They didn't. I don't know where this rumor comes from. I don't. Don't take everything you read online from really fringe sources at face value. New to the channel, what are your thoughts on the new mass? It's valid. I haven't had my family in the new mass in years, though, because it's just so many liturgical problems there. But it's valid. But the origins of it are extremely questionable. I've gone over that at length. I'm not anti-new mass. If you go to the new mass, fight for your new mass to be as traditional as possible. But if I had the power to, I'd put the old mass back in as the main mass over time. Any chance this goes past the 13th? Yeah, there's a chance. I find it interesting that a lot of people grab onto the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima as if a pope emerging that day would be a positive sign. Let me give you an alternative hypothesis. What if you get white smoke on May 13th, and on the loggia steps, Cardinal Hollerich, Cardinal Supich, Cardinal Tagle? Would you read that as a positive sign, or would you read that as a chastisement imminent situation? I would read it as the latter. All right, folks. Walter Wall says it was the new mass supposed to be in Latin and ad orientem. Yeah, basically, if you read it, Sacrosanctum Concilium is the document from Vatican II on the liturgy. Nowhere in that document does it say eliminate the traditional mass and give a new mass. It does not say that anywhere in that document. When you read Sacrosanctum Concilium, what it sounds like is that you were supposed to take the traditional mass, make the Pater Noster and which is the Our Father, and the readings of the mass proclaimed in the vernacular. Maybe the creed too, but that's about it. Otherwise, it was supposed to still be the traditional Latin mass. That's not what they gave us. I'm not a fan of the vernacular in the mass at all, because it just opens the door to so much ad-libbing by the priest. And there certainly wasn't, 15 different prayers of consecration or whatever it is. Raven Ray says, Raven Ray's from the Philippines. He would know. He says, I really have to prevent a knee-jerk reaction every time Tagle is mentioned out of the blue. Well, again, Raven Ray, I'm going to thoroughly enjoy telling you this. He is the number one most followed person on TikTok when it comes to consumed minutes and things of any priest in the church. Any of them. Number one. Young people love Tagle. And for the life of me, I cannot figure why. Anthony Stine, try not doom posting challenge. Impossible. Another person called me Dr. Doomstein. Well, I look at the makeup of the College of Cardinals, and I have to wonder. One of my old parishes had a polka match, just awful. Can I join the stream? Give me like 20 minutes. No, because we're wrapping this up. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. We will be back on here later today. I will see if I can find somebody to join me this afternoon, if possible. And as always, folks, please pray for the church and pray that the College of Cardinals does the will of our Lord and not the will of man at this. So that is the most important thing that they can do. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.